let's get serious here for a minute, and before you go tonight, we do have to talk about this. Well, you know what? Let's open up with this, and then we'll get back to the president's press conference, because this fair value mark-to-market accounting is terrifying me, because the two knuckleheads, the two guys whom I wish Mo from the Three Stooges was still alive, because if there was ever any two guys on Capitol Hill that need to have their heads conked together like Mo could only do, it's Christopher Dodd and Barney Frank, the architects of the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac debacle that led us to where we are today. Now these guys are talking about suspending the mark-to-market accounting, and they think that's their way out of this, which I think is a way toward cooking the books, and honestly, we're not going to solve anything. So, Professor, for those that don't quite understand what they want to do and what this fair market value or mark-to-market accounting is, give us a little like page one analysis of what it is, how it stands now, what they want to do, and what would be the better way to go all about this, because it seems like this is a pretty big, complicated deal that not everybody understands and somebody's trying to sneak in the back door with. Yes, no? What do you think?
I'm a little... Mark-to-market accounting is assigning a value to a position held in a financial instrument based on the current market price for the instrument or similar instruments. For example, the final value of a futures contract that expires in 9 months will not be known until it expires. If it is mark-to-market, for accounting purposes, it assigns the value that it would currently fetch in the open market. Well, whenever you have taxes, you have to have some sort of evaluation of things, and if something hasn't been sold recently, you just don't know, so you have to make it up somehow. And I'm not sure that I go along with this. Certainly anything that comes from Dodd and Frank, authors of Freddie and Fannie, is something that we have to look with a great jaundiced eye.
Well, let me read the paragraph to you, because I don't know if this means that the U.S. Treasury Department's going along with them or not. It says U.S. Treasury Department and the Securities and Exchange Commission are not discussing the suspension of a controversial fair value accounting rule blamed for billions of dollars in bank losses, a source familiar with matters said on Thursday. Speculation that the U.S. government would suspend the accounting rule surfaced earlier, sending U.S. stocks higher, but the source said no such discussions had taken place between the Treasury Department and SEC. Key policymakers had suggested that the rule could be amended. Dodd and Barney Frank said it might be possible to modify fair value accounting rules for banks facing steep write-downs of troubled assets without abandoning the underlying accounting standard. So I guess, Professor, I'm asking, what did I just read? Does that mean they're not going to do what Christopher Dodd and Barney Frank want, and that the banks are going to have to go with the original value on this, or not, or what?
I really can't say. I'd have to study this a little bit more carefully.
Okay, because it just seems like somebody's in for a hose in here, and I don't know.
But my understanding of what's going on with bank losses is that this was imposed on the banks by the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, where they forced banks to give mortgages to people who, under the old conditions, would never have qualified for them. What happened in 1992 was the Boston Federal Reserve started accusing the banks of being racist because they weren't lending money and mortgage for houses to black people in the same proportion as white people. And why is that? Because under the old rules, if you came into the bank and you wanted to get a mortgage for your house, you'd have to put 20 or 25% down. You'd have to show some sort of credit rating. You'd have to show a job, a fixed address. You'd have to show a record of repaying debts in the past, things like that. And whites had better credit ratings than blacks, so whites were getting disproportionately more of the mortgages. And the Fed said this is intolerable and racist, and we've got to stop it. So we now have so-called ninja loans, NINJAA, no income, no job, no address, no assets, and you get a loan. In other words, what these people did is they put people into houses and forced banks to give them the loans, and then you had these debts that were unable to be serviced, these mortgages that were not repaying, and the banks were in trouble because of that.
And I believe the problem now is if the bank takes a loss on it, that's going to deplete their capital, and they're saying, well, we shouldn't have to take the whole loss because it's not valued at that much anymore. It never was valued that much?
Well, these loans were given when houses were rising in price, and a lot of them, the people didn't have any investment in their own houses. See, there is such a thing called a secondary market. It's easier to see with cars than with banks. So let me talk about the car market first, and then we'll get back to banks. A secondary market is a market in used cars. And a secondary market is very good, because if we passed a law that you couldn't have a secondary market, you could only have new cars, the new car would be worth less to you than it would be at present when you know you can sell it whenever you want to. Mm-hmm. So secondary cars or secondary markets in cars are good. Secondary markets in clothing, you don't have too much, but you have a little bit of it. Well, we also have secondary markets in mortgages. Sometimes you'll get a mortgage with Bank A, and then you'll get a notice 3 months later, hey, don't pay us anymore, we just sold your mortgage to Bank B. Okay. Go pay Bank B, and sometimes you go to Bank C. Well, what happens is people gather these mortgages together and make commercial paper out of them, and then these non-performing mortgages are supposed to be the backup for the banks, and when they're non-performing, the bank is in trouble. So really what I think sometimes they call them toxic paper or something like that. And the cause of it, as far as I'm concerned, is the Federal Reserve System. So the question comes, well, now what to do? You know, should we, how much are these things worth, if anything? And Obama, I think, and his people are now going to start some sort of apparatus where a new bank or a government bank will buy up all these toxic assets and take them off the balance sheets of the banks to make the banks more viable.
Well, Professor, this is Jay Weiss over the newsroom. What if they get rid of mark-to-market? What's an appropriate mechanism to determine the asset value of the bad assets?
Well, you know, the only way to determine asset values is to have a free market. I mean, what's the value of my pen?
What any old fool will pay for it.
That's it, precisely. That's the only way. There is no way. Any other way to determine value is a central planner saying, well, this is the value of this. It can't be done. The only way you can determine the value of something is based on a market price, which is why taxes are very difficult. You know, like right now, let's say my house is assessed at $200,000, and because I bought it at $200,000 10 years ago, and I'm paying on the basis of it being worth $200,000, but the thing hasn't changed hands in 10 years, so we don't really know what the value of it is. So it's sort of a very difficult thing to know exactly how to do this, which leads me to say we should have less taxes.
Yeah, really. 260-1870, toll free from anywhere in the country, 866-889-0870. This is Monday Night Economics, and I can guarantee you most of the conversation you're going to have for most of the year is going to revolve around things economic. So if you have any questions about anything economic, and we call it Economics 101 because this is the introductory level class, here's your chance to talk to Dr. Walter Block, a professor of economics at Loyola University here in New Orleans, and ask any questions that you might have. It might be something as simple as supply and demand that you don't understand. It might be something about the money supply. It might be something about the Federal Reserve. Any term like that you hear bandied about that people might presume that they know, and then they use it, and then they really don't know what it means. So there are no dumb questions. We're not going to make fun of you. Professor, one thing that got my interest when I heard President Obama say it tonight was that we avoided catastrophe by passing the TARP legislation. And the only thing I could say when I heard that was, really? Because I don't know what we avoided. We only spent half of the money. It seems as though things are as bad as they could possibly get right now. And we're going to find out tomorrow how Secretary Geithner and the Obama administration plans to spend the second $350 billion. So is that, at best, being generous, a little bit of an over-exaggeration to say that we avoided catastrophe with this TARP program?
Well, no, I think we're getting into catastrophe. It's as if there's a fire that we started, and now we're pouring gasoline on it and hoping that the fire will go out. It just seems very silly to me. The government was the primary cause of the debacle, and the way they caused it was by bailing out and inflating, and now they're purporting to solve the problem by bailing out and inflating. So I really can't see how this is helping us. I don't think that this is avoiding catastrophe. I think this is inviting catastrophe.
And then, I heard the president use a phrase about we can't afford not to do anything, and that to me, beg the question, well, what happens if we do nothing? And what happens if right now the president says, you know what, I'm done. I'm tired of all the bickering. I'm tired of all the partisan arguing. I am pulling the stimulus bill. We're not going to do anything. And Secretary Geithner would have come tomorrow morning in front of the television cameras and all the print media and says, after careful consultation with the president and our top economic advisors, we are returning the TARP money to Congress. We don't want it. We've decided that the best thing we can do, and Professor, you have to hold your answer because we have a CBS News update coming here. But I want to get your answer when we come back, because let's look at the other side of it. We're going to pull a stimulus bill. We're not going to spend $850 billion. We're going to pull the second half of the TARP money because we're tired of it being wasted. We're not going to do any of that. We've decided just to stop, take 6 months, let's see what happens, and then if the economy is still in dire straits, we'll decide from there. I want your answer when we come back. Professor Walter Block, an economics doctor at Loyola University in New Orleans. Your phone calls, too, when we return. I'm Tommy Tucker, Night Shift, Big 870 WWL. It's Monday Night Economics. Our guest, Dr. Walter Block, professor of economics at Loyola University, and we're dissecting the president's press conference tonight, which dealt with, for the most part, the economy. Professor, I don't know how old you are. Do you remember this television show, Branded, that came on a long time ago with Chuck Connors?
Vaguely.
He was a deserter with, I don't know, the North or South during the Civil War, and it would open with him standing there, and he was a deserter, so they would take a sword and cut off his buttons, and then they'd rip off the collar things, epaulets or whatever off his collar, and it was branded, marked with a coward shield or something like that. The reporter that asked the president tonight the question about Alex Rodriguez and steroids, that's how I would treat him. I would cut off the buttons of his suit and strip his reporter's credentials from him. Because, quite frankly, given the economic problems this country's facing, I don't know that we really have time to worry about one baseball player injecting steroids, but that's just my opinion. Given what I asked you earlier about, the big TARP funds that we voted in, or at least Congress appropriated in September, then Paulson said, no, we're going to do something different in November. Now, tomorrow we find out that the new Treasury Secretary Geithner is going to tell us his plans for that. President Obama says this $825, whatever it's up to now, $1 billion surplus package. Time is of the essence on that. We can't afford not to do anything. What if we just pull a plug on everything? And what if the Treasury Secretary says, we're not going to do anything with the TARP money, we're giving it back, and the president pulls his stimulus bill? What would happen?
Well, I'm a professor, so I can never answer a question directly, otherwise they'd kick me out.
Absolutely, that's part of your contract.
So let me just say that TARP stands for Troubled Assets Relief Program. What it means is that they're going to take assets that are in difficulty and they're going to throw money at them. I also wanted to mention that the way to find out how much something is worth is to have an auction. Like, I don't know what this Rembrandt painting is, and I don't think you do, but one way to find out what a Rembrandt painting is worth is to have an auction.
And the quickest way to find out what any old fool would pay.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, to answer your question,
okay.
Because professors are supposed to come
sure,
back
absolutely.
Eventually. One of the, things that the doctors swear, their allegiance or whatever, is first do no harm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very good thing that we economists should borrow from the medical field. First, do no harm. Because, Obama is saying, well, we got to do something, but that's not true. We don't got to do something. We only got to do something if we can help ourselves. But if all we can do is hurt ourselves, then better to do nothing. So your question is, well, what if nothing were done and we didn't have any TARP and we didn't have any bailout, we didn't have any money for Detroit and we didn't have any money for this one or that one or the banks? My answer would be better than doing anything of the sort, because at least we wouldn't be making things worse. And they are making things worse by pouring more gasoline on the fire. But if I were in charge, if Ron Paul had won and had made me Treasury of the Secretary, or Secretary of the Treasury, sorry, I wouldn't stand still for doing nothing. I think there are things we can do, and the things we can do mainly are to disband this fascistic government which controls everything and runs everything, and get back to free enterprise. Because if we had free enterprise and laissez-faire capitalism, we wouldn't be having any of these problems in the first place.
Did you see the cover of Newsweek or not?
No, I haven't. Please.
Got a blue hand and a red hand grasping each other, and I believe the title is "We Are Socialists."
Well, maybe they are, but I'm not.
But I'm just talking about the economic system of the country and how we had leaned so far toward that in the waning years of the Bush administration, and make for an interesting read this week if you're looking to pick something up. I would suggest Newsweek, but that's an interesting analogy that you make. In terms of the economy, the patient could be suffering a diabetic coma, so before we just start treating them for a heart attack, maybe we should find out what the real problem is before we just start shooting them full of insulin.
Right. And now most of the commentators are Keynesians. And I include Milton Friedman and the Chicagoans here, too. They're just a variant of Keynesians. And for the Keynesians, the problem is always that the market is incapable of taking care of itself, and the market needs to be kick-started or to slow down. It's sort of like a car. It veers off in one way or another way, or it goes too fast or it goes too slowly. But my view is that we don't really have a free market. We have socialism now, or fascism. Socialism is government ownership, fascism is heavy regulation. We have a combination of both of them. We don't really have a free market, so the reason the market isn't working is because it's not free, and the thing to do is to free it.
Hold it right there. We will be right back. When we come back, I promise y'all I will shut my mouth and I'll take nothing but your phone calls. Professor Block will be with us till 9 o'clock, Monday Night Economics, Big 870 WWL. You got the whole economic problem figured out. I was going to say you don't need to call, but actually, Professor, if they do, those are the ones we really want to hear from, right?
Absolutely.
Because we're always open to answers, but I would have to suspect that you might have a question or two about what's going on and where this is all going to lead, because the president said tonight this is the worst economic times we're going to have or have had since the last Great Depression. Oh, Professor, I got an email, because last week we were talking about the war and the effect it had on the economy and getting us out of the Great Depression, and you said it was not World War II. That's a great misconception. That's what got us out of the Great Depression. What was it that eventually did get us out of the Great Depression?
Well, we get out of all depressions because what depressions consist of is misallocation of resources. What the government does in the 90s under Greenspan, and what it did under Hoover Roosevelt, was it artificially lowered interest rates, which led to inappropriate investments in heavy industry. And the Depression consists of weaning away from those things. So it takes time, and if FDR lengthens the Depression, or if Bush does, it just takes more time. So I don't think that the war got us out of it. It's just that after a while, all of these malinvestments were atrophied, and we were back to a non-depression state.
Kind of like in spite of ourselves, almost?
Yeah. In other words, the market works. Ronald Reagan used to talk about the magic of the market. He didn't really act on it, but he was a magnificent orator about it, just as Obama is a magnificent orator for socialism. But the market works. Eventually these things go away. The problem was that FDR lengthened the Depression. Had he engaged in a laissez-faire policy of doing nothing and maybe getting rid of the Fed and getting rid of the fiat currency we've got, other things that a Ron Paul administration would do, we would have got out of that Depression a lot sooner, and we would have gotten out of this one or not had it in the first place had these policies been pursued.
And look, we welcome differing viewpoints, so if you disagree with anything the professor has to say, we would love to hear from you. 260-1870, toll-free 866-889-0870. Of course, we are going to limit it to facts. Go ahead, Mike, you're on WWL. Mike in Monterey? Hey.
Hello?
Hey, Mike, you're on WWL.
Yeah, hi, Tommy. Tommy, I know you're a Republican, but I really wish you'd get a more balanced discussion going here with.
Well, that's why I said we invite differing views. What do you got?
Well, I think the professor was talking about 92 being the beginning of this. I think it's dead wrong. Most of the mortgages that were given in 92 have been paid off. The big problem we've had are the subprime mortgages that took place in 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And that had nothing to do with Freddie and Fannie. They were not giving subprime mortgages. So I think the professor is off base.
Well, wait, now let's give him a chance to respond. Professor?
I think you're quite right. I didn't mean that the Depression started in 92. I meant that the boom started in 92. And that was the cause of the Depression. In the Austrian business cycle theory, and by the way, Austrianism has nothing to do with the economics of Austria, it's just where the the school of thought emanated, the cause of the Depression is an artificial boom. So you're quite right that the subprime didn't come about until 2002 or roughly then. But
could you guys slow up a little bit for the people like me in the back of the room? Slow it down a little bit.
Okay, let me say it more slowly and more clearly.
All right.
In the Austrian business cycle theory, what causes the Depression is an artificial boom. And the artificial boom is created by lowering interest rates and encouraging investments that never should have been made in the first place, mainly in housing and cars and heavy industry and things like that.
Hang on. Now, Mike, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you, but that took place, that was the subprime loans. You said it started in 1992 with the Community Reinvestment Act that caused the loans to be made irresponsibly. And I agree with you, it was irresponsible loans, but that wasn't from the 1992 Community Reinvestment Act. Those loans have been paid off. That's from the subprime loans that were granted during 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Well, wait, hang on 1 second. Let me just try to jump in here for a second. If it was 92, that would be 16 years ago, so that would be halfway through a 30-year mortgage, right? Or not?
Yeah, but those are not the mortgages, Tommy, that are going bad.
All right, Professor, what about that?
When I mentioned 1992, I was referring specifically to a Boston Federal Reserve System report of 92, which said that lending was racist. This was a report published in 1992. Now, it took a few years before we really got in over our heads with giving people who don't deserve houses, giving them mortgages. But I wasn't referring to 92 as anything else but the date of the publication of this Boston Fed study.
Well, that's another good example. You said that was racist. Well, and then you said that all they were doing was loaning money to whites because they had better credit ratings. And then,
Mike, hang on. He's just quoting the report now. Is that right, Professor?
Yes, and I didn't say that they're only lending money to whites. I'm saying they're disproportionately lending money to whites. That was the complaint.
Right, I agree. But it wasn't because, but you said, though, Professor, that they were really just loaning money to whites because they had better credit rating, and that's not true. They were loaning money to whites and not loaning money to blacks because of redlining. Redlining is where they'd take a red line and they'd put a circle around a black neighborhood, and they say, regardless of that person's credit, we will not make a loan in this neighborhood.
No, I don't think they put a red line around black neighborhoods. I think what they do is they put a red line around neighborhoods where people are not paying their mortgages. And what they're saying is that even if you personally, what is your name, sir?
Mike.
Your name is Mike. Let's say you're a good person, you've been paying your loan, but you're surrounded by a whole bunch of people that are not paying their loans. And forget about white, black, green, blue, it doesn't matter what the color is. What the bank is doing is saying, look, Mike's neighborhood is a non-paying neighborhood, so therefore we think that this neighborhood is going to deteriorate, and we have money from our depositors, and we've got to safeguard this money, so we're going to draw a red line around this neighborhood that is not paying its money. And now there are some people in that neighborhood, such as Mike, who, let's say, is paying, but it's sort of tough on him because what the bank is saying is that if people don't pay their mortgages, the whole neighborhood falls apart. And even though Mike's house specifically will be well kept up because he's a good guy, but if the whole neighborhood deteriorates, Mike is probably going to move out, and it's not a going concern. So I think redlining is a perfectly legitimate activity to undertake.
Well, the problem is it stereotypes people within black neighborhoods, and that was the problem back then.
So, Mike, Mike, let me try to advance this a little bit because we've got a bunch of calls. Are you trying to say then that it was almost like an affirmative action type of thing with the lending practices where it was making up, the lenient credit standards were making up for some sins of the past? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that, Tommy, because that implies that you want to give people credit where they don't deserve it.
Well, tell me what you're trying to say.
I'm saying give them credit when they do deserve it, and not just because they live in a black neighborhood. But look, I don't want to take. I'm sorry, I don't want to take up all your time. Let me make one last point, and I'll get off.
Okay.
I've taken too much time to begin with. But there are most economists, including conservative economists, Martin Feldstein under Ronald Reagan, most of George Bush I and George Bush II economists, all of these people agree we need a strong stimulus package. And Tommy, you get the one economist who doesn't think we need it.
No, Mike, we get more than one economist. I get Mark Rose on here all the time. I get finance guys. I get all different kinds of economists. You might happen to have heard this gentleman, Dr. Block, but we get all different kinds of economists. And, sir, Mike, you had 5 minutes to present your side of it, so don't say that we're being biased.
I appreciate it.
Right?
Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome, Mike. You bet. Dr. Block, stay right where you are. We will pause for a moment. We'll be back. More of your phone calls, 260-1870, toll-free, 866-889-0870. Monday Night Economics. You're allowed to disagree with the teacher if you want. It'll not be held against you on the final exam. Be right back, Big 870 WWL. Back to the phone lines we go. Patrick Uptown, you're on with Professor Block from Loyola.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
Good.
Hey, I had a question, and to contradict what Mike said, it was in 1998, and I'm just looking at this objectively, and pointing fingers isn't going to solve the problem. It was the Clinton administration that forced Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's hand.
Say it again now?
It was the Clinton administration that forced the banks to loan money to people who were less creditworthy. I'm an independent. That happened. Yeah, you can Google it.
That was with Franklin Raines, wasn't it, under the behest of Dodd and...
I'm not sure who it was. And it really
I'm pretty sure Franklin Raines. It doesn't. We are where we are.
Right.
You know what? That is probably the most cogent point yet. It is what it is. We are where we are. What do we do now?
And you have to fix it. The first stimulus package was to put money back into the banks to lend people. And I want to ask this question concisely, and I'm going to do my best. When I went to college and I took out a student loan, they showed me a video. It was explained to me that if I didn't pay off the student loan, it was going to be a fixed interest rate at some point. It could go lower, could go higher, but it's going to be under that percentage. When I took out a loan, I could default on the loan, but if I defaulted on the loan, they could garnish my wages. I'm wondering why, when we had an opportunity with the first stimulus package, that the federal government could have set up the same system, given the money to the banks to distribute to people to pay off their loans. It puts money back into the system, and it solves two problems. It puts money back into the system, and it helps these people pay off their loans until they get back on their feet.
Yeah, Professor, this is one of the biggest spending bills ever. And, you know, I was talking to somebody the other day about this. You go back to Aesop's fables, and it's haste makes waste, but somehow this is getting lost in all of this. And, you know, go back to the initial money we gave to the banks. It was kind of like, well, here, take it. And now we have some problems with how it was used and how it was spent. Why no safeguards on this from the beginning? What was going on there? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's sort of superficial, but I don't think that the key is to give $1 trillion away with safeguards. I think the key is to not give $1 trillion away in the first place, because as I never tire of saying, it's sort of like pouring gasoline on the fire, and if you pour gasoline on a fire with safeguards, it's still pouring gasoline on the fire.
Professor,
yes.
If you're going to give the money away, I mean, they gave it to these banks, and these banks haven't, from my understanding, haven't done anything with it. And they've wasted it. Yeah. So
we got our answer, maybe, huh, Patrick? We got our answer. What happens if we do nothing? Because we've done nothing. Right?
But look, if they would have put safeguards on this in the beginning, and at least something would have been done. At least.
Well, let's see. Would anything have happened, Professor, if there had been some provisions and, you know, you got to do this, loosen up the credit, you have to actually loan this money out? Would it have made a difference or not?
You know, I think that. I agree with the caller that safeguards are better than no safeguards, holding everything else constant. But the way I see banks, they're sort of like a deer caught in the headlights. They don't really know what to do. They've been pummeled. They've been pushed around. Banking is a very, very heavily regulated industry. Before this 1992 Boston Fed thing, that they were rated on financial probity. Now they're rated on how many loans go to people who are non-performing loan payers. So
it's their fault that we're in the situation that we're in.
Well, some of them yes, some of them no. Hang on, everybody, right there. We're going to do another CBS update. I want to talk to you specifically about the Whitney Bank when we come back, because they got some money, but weren't doing anything wrong, and I can change what they're doing. I want to get your take on that when we come back. Big 870 WWL, I'm Tommy Tucker. Just a couple of minutes left for this edition of Monday Night Economics. But we'll have a study group going on after the professor leaves. Patrick Uptown, we had left it with?
Well, we left it with the professor was saying that, you know, the banks are so regulated. Wait, I want to bring up something else. It was the deregulation.
The Whitney, real quick. That's what it was. Quickly, and I'll let you go, Patrick. The Whitney Bank got $350 million, I think. The guy that runs the bank says, you know, a CEO, we're going to stick to what we're doing. Our bank's fine, and I'm not going to be forced into doing something I don't want to do because I got $350 million of your dollars. If a bank is doing everything fine and they're profitable, should their strategy change because there's a problem going on in the banking world, a macro problem, when they're doing everything fine and their bank is being run profitably?
Well, in my view, we have to be much more basic in our outlook, and we have to worry about things or question the status quo with fractional reserve banking and fiat currency. I'm a fan of the gold standard, and in my view, when we had a gold standard, we didn't have depressions. Ron Paul is the only Republican congressman who would favor that, and I think if we take a much deeper cut at these problems, we get to first base or we hit the home run or whatever it is. Whereas if we just worry about this bank or that bank, I agree. If the government is stupid enough to give Whitney the money, which they shouldn't, Whitney should not use it in a way that they don't think will help the bottom line.
Patrick, let me go to Gene real quick. Professor, we only have about 2 minutes. Gene, I want to take your question. This looks like a pretty good one. Go ahead, Gene. You're on WWL.
Hey, Tommy.
Hey.
Professor.
Hey, Gene.
You got to help me out with this, Tommy. I've been listening to the conversation. If Professor here understands, but throwing more money after it is not doing any good, President Bush, Clinton, President Obama must have top-notch economists on this.
Well, let me tell you what it says in the Newsweek article. It says the Obama administration is caught in a paradox. It must borrow and spend to fix a crisis created by too much borrowing and spending. So apparently Newsweek doesn't get it either because they're saying that's what you got to do to fix the situation that you're in. How can they not get it, Professor, at least not understand what you seem to get?
Well, you know, what Gene is saying and what a previous caller said about Feldstein is right. You know, my view is a minority position within the economics profession, but this is really an ad hominem argument, namely that since my views are the minority views, they must be wrong because all sorts of big-shot economists from Harvard and Princeton are Keynesians. Well, they're the ones that have been running things, and look at the way they've been running things.
How's that working out for you? One other thing, Professor, why doesn't the president kind of like trot out some of his economists to kind of give us some theory on this? Instead, it always comes from him. Is that because maybe he's a better front man, better communicator?
Well, he is a magnificent communicator. I think the most recent communicator that's in his league is Ronald Reagan. He's a magnificent debater. He's got a beautiful voice. He's very articulate. He's wonderful. It's just that he's a socialist.
Hi, Professor. A pleasure as always. We'll see you in class next Monday night at 8 o'clock, okay?
It'll be my pleasure.
Economics 101. Don't miss it. Monday night economics. Now the football season's over with Dr. Walter Block, Professor of Economics over at Loyola University.